The wheat and the tares have to grow together. How often have you heard that one used to cover up sin in the church? I certainly have, plenty of times. And strangely enough, people have even used this to somehow accuse me of being in the wrong for leaving the church. They somehow pride themselves for staying in a totally messed up church because they have this twisted way of thinking, and they accuse me of evil for not wanting to stay. People have so misunderstood this passage that they think they need to stay in a church even when it's obviously an apostasy. This misunderstanding is very similar to misunderstanding who and what the church really is. And if you haven't watched my video on that yet, you should after you listen to this one. Well, Matthew 13:25 through 29. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat, and went his way. But when the blade was sprung up and brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. So the servants of the householder came and said unto him, Sir, didst not thou sow good seed in thy field? From whence then hath it tares? He said unto them, An enemy hath done this. The servants said unto him, Will thou then that we go and gather them up? But he said, Nay, lest while you gather up the tares, you root up also the wheat with them. Well, one point I want to make about this is that a tare is not noticed until it's grown up. Notice when you read that, it said the wheat brought forth fruit, then the tare appeared. Now, if you've ever walked in a wheat field, you know wheat grows close together. I used to walk wheat fields when I was younger, and I can tell you that when the wheat is first up, without some serious investigation, you would never notice a tare among the wheat. Here's a picture of it coming up. There's no way you would see a tare out in that field unless you got down on your hands and knees and examined every single one of them. And even then, you would have to really know your wheat. Here it is, and it's a little taller. It doesn't get much easier to find the tares in here either. Here it is as it's gotten older and with a closer look. Maybe you would notice this. Seeing it side by side here, you can tell it. But in a wheat field, I would guess that the majority of people would never notice this as a tare either. Nope, not until it's ready for harvest can you really see the difference. I thought this picture is kind of funny. The wheat brings forth fruit, but the tares are just empty headed. Kind of fitting. When the big machinery comes, it will separate the weeds from the wheat. See, the machines are made to deal with that. They can save the kernels of grain and throw everything else away. But when this parable was written in Christ's day, they harvested the wheat by hand, and then they separated tares before threshing. Now, why wouldn't you pull the weeds out before harvest time? Well, because the roots would be so entwined with the roots of the wheat, you'd pull wheat out before it bore fruit, and then the wheat would be useless. It wouldn't have matured enough, you see. But once the wheat is mature enough, then you can harvest the field. And if a tare happens to pull up wheat, then it won't matter because the wheat's fully mature and the wheat already has its destiny locked in. It's going to the threshing floor, while the tare will be cast aside. Well, all this is fairly easy to understand. You've heard it many times before, probably. And it's really not the point I wanted to make. I mean, the main point that you don't notice a tare until the wheat is ripe is something you need to remember. But the thing I want to compare, and the problem I want to deal with, is a problem many people run into when they want to lump tares and thorns together. You see, a big giant thorn plant sticking 50 feet above the wheat is not a tare. Nobody's going to confuse that with a wheat plant. The only people that will confuse those two are other thorns. That is not what this verse is talking about. This is just a sinner in the camp and needs to be dealt with. Don't confuse the two issues. When it is such open sin, it has to be dealt with. Otherwise, it will overshadow the congregation and put out the rays of light, which will eventually lead to the death of the other plants. And if a big thorn plant comes walking in my garden and says, "Look here, my fine man, I'd like to plant myself right in the middle of your wheat," why, I'd be a fool to allow that. And yet, this is the very thing that's going on today. We have thrown the doors wide open and allow any thorn to take up residency in the pews. But this is not the worst of it. The worst thing is that the thorns have worked their way up to the front and have a hold of the microphone. Many of them have even gone to Andrews, gotten a theology degree, and are now standing in the pulpit spewing their poisonous seeds on the congregation every week. And consider this, if you eat the seeds from the thorn plant, you will get sick. You might even die. You better know that and understand the difference between a tear and a thorn. The Lord will not write as wise those who cannot distinguish between a tree that bears thornberries and a tree that bears olives. Dealing with open sin is not wrong, and that means open apostate false teaching that's going on in the church. That is even the greatest sin. Dealing with that is not what the parable of the wheat and tares is talking about. Christ has plainly taught that those who persist in open sin must be separated from the church, but he has not committed to us the work of judging character and motive. While it's not always possible to distinguish the tares from the wheat without judging character, such is not the case with thorns. Yet how many in the church today have never made this distinction? And they just want to believe that the tares and the thorns should all stay together till the end of time. And in so doing, they've created a situation that is fatal to many of the wheat. Yes, under a cry of love, 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 the Adventist church has created a condition where the wheat are being choked to death by the thorns. And some fell among thorns, and the thorns sprang up with it and choked it. It is impossible for you to unite with those who are corrupt and still remain pure. God and Christ and the heavenly host would have men know that if he unites with the corrupt, he will become corrupt.